Hi everybody. Now I'm here inside of our next plant, Sequioa sempervirens in the Cupressaceae. And this is our third gymnosperm of the day and our third gymnosperm family, the Cupressaceae, the cypress family. Sequioa sempervirens. Where to start? It is by far the most famous plant in California. It's the tallest tree in the world. Not this particular individual, but there's one in Redwood National Park that is, I believe, 412 feet or something like that. It is the tallest measured tree ever. And it is a tree that really dominates and creates its own kind of environment. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. But first I'm going to tell you how to identify it. Okay, so redwoods are called redwood because their wood is red, like when you, in any redwood project you might have, like a deck. And the bark is usually reddish, although it can be kind of grayish sometimes, or brownish, depending on how much sun exposure it has, and also if there's any fungus growing on it. But the bark is fibrous and kind of pulls off in little fibers. It has definitely vertical furrows, and this bark is has a very characteristic texture, and it's incredibly fire resistant. So even though we've had these fires which are incredibly hot and some of the biggest fires in California history, the ones that have burned through the redwoods, the largest redwoods have, in reports I've read, have survived intact because of these fires. And so, and you often see these really big old redwoods have survived fires many times in their lives, and they can burn through parts of it, but the rest of the tree survives and it just keeps growing. And that's something that you see when you're in a redwood forest. Another thing that is very unusual about redwoods is that they're able to have vegetative reproduction. They have these clonal root sprouts, and so when you come across redwoods in groups like this, these are the same genetic individual. And this particular individual is really special that way because this clone here coming off the side has had a somatic mutation, and it's an albino. And so you can see this part of the redwood here has white leaves, which is incredibly unusual for a plant. And obviously that plant is not producing any photosynthesis. And the only way that this is possible is because this shoot is being supported by the mother tree underground. It's connected. So when you see redwoods, and there's been a lot of logging in California, redwood has basically ran the economy for many decades in the state. Some estimates 95% of redwood forests were old growth redwoods were cut down. So you often see redwoods either that were logged or that died of natural causes. The surviving clones will resprout and they'll form like what they call a fairy ring. So you'll have multiple stems coming out in a circle sometimes. And here it's just kind of a little hemicircle here on the side of a hillside. Redwood leaves are flat, linear, and they are dark green on the top, and on the bottom they usually are whitish with a green midrib. You can't break the skin on the tip like you can with Torreya. And a characteristic that I've noticed about redwood leaves is they often have this like segmented look to them. Check this out. And that corresponds to the year in which it was grown. So this is probably here 3 years of growth. 1, 2, 3. And you just often see that on redwoods in the understory. These are kind of segmented look to it. Here's one segment, here's another, there's another. One last thing I wanted to mention about clones, which is really interesting, is that it's not just this group here of trees which could be the same genetic individual. Some research done by a PhD student in ESPM showed about a decade ago that in like big basin forests, she went and did genetic tests of all the redwoods in the forest, and she found that some of those clones were like more than 100 yards away from one another. So that these shoots underground can be traveling along and go quite a large distance before sending up another sprout. So I think that's pretty cool. Redwood leaves are what we call dimorphic, in the sense that you can have different looking leaves in the understory than you do at the top. And here's some fallen leaves. You can see an example of that. This is what a kind of a understory leaf looks like. And this is what it looks like on the canopy. Just these, what we call awl-shaped leaves, kind of clustered along the stem. And that's because a redwood canopy, very high, very exposed to the sun, just like we were talking about in class. This is a sun leaf, and that's a shade leaf. So, what else can I tell you about redwoods? There's a lot to talk about. The cones you can often see along the bottom of a tree. Here's a redwood cone, and they look like little soccer balls, basically. The shape of these scales are called peltate scales. But you can see that it was a sphere and it opened up, and what's inside of that is a really tiny seed. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about. It's a really cool story, is that redwood seeds are just tiny. I'm gonna see if I shake it, maybe I'll see one. They look like a grain of sand, basically. They're really tiny. And those seeds, they need bare ground to be able to germinate, because they're so small that their little proto-root can't penetrate any kind of leaf litter. It needs to be right on bare ground. And it also needs nutrients right away. And so that's a reason that redwood seeds really will only germinate in areas that are recently burned. So redwood has a relationship with fire for its sexual reproduction. So those seeds are going to need to be bare soil, like after a fire, with ash and stuff that has really readily available nutrients for it to germinate and sprout and grow. Most of the time, they'll just be sort of plodding along and then reproducing asexually with these shoots. And they can dominate for areas of forest for a really long time. So this particular individual, this large one, can be hundreds of years old, and there's redwoods that are known to be over 1,000 years old. But that particular genetic individual could be even older than that, right? Because it could fall over and then resprout. Where do they live? Redwoods live from Big Sur all the way to southern Oregon, Brookings, Oregon. So endemic to the California floristic province, but they used to live in a much larger range, and I'll be talking about that later in class. But right now they're found just in that area, and always within 100 miles of the coast. So, and usually not in view of the ocean. I don't think salt spray is really good for redwoods. So you usually find them in an area near the coast where you can't see the ocean, and to about 100 miles in the coast. And they get really common and dominant in Mendocino and Humboldt counties where it's wetter. Here in the Bay Area, you find them in Marin County. You do find them in the East Bay. Redwood Park is an area where redwoods are native. And they've been planted, of course, many places around Berkeley. Very characteristic, charismatic mega tree here in California, and one of my favorites. So one consequence of redwoods being so darn tall is that they actually intercept this marine layer that's coming in off the coast. And when their leaves touch the marine layer, that fog will condense and turn to water. And so you can get, actually it can be raining on you in a redwood forest, but that rain is just condensation from the fog. And that's a really important source of water, not only for the redwoods themselves, but for all the plants that are living in the redwood forest. And the redwood, the leaves can actually uptake that water. It's called foliar uptake. So some of that water drips and goes down to the ground and gets taken up by the roots, but some of it just kind of seeps into the tree through the leaves. So that's one reason why redwoods are able to maintain a distribution in like the Bay Area and in Big Sur, where it's really can be hot and dry. They really take advantage of that marine layer. And their closest relatives, redwoods, are the giant sequoia, which is named in a different genus, Sequoia dendron, but in the same, I don't know why they're not just the same genus, but that's the world's giant living organism. So the biggest, heaviest creature on Earth is a giant sequoia. That's at Sequoia National Park. And they're separated out a couple different ways. They have very similar looking bark. Giant sequoias have bigger cones, and then their leaves are not the flat sprays. They look much more like this throughout the whole tree. The awl-shaped leaves. So your Sequoia sempervirens has got flat, linear leaves that look like they're segmented. Fibrous bark that's a great insulator, protects it from fire, and often has multiple stems due to its ability to be clonal.